In the dusty, sun-scorched ranges of a Marine Corps training ground, a problem was festering. The most elite shooters in the world were missing. Not by a little, but by a margin that defied logic and shook the very foundation of their confidence. Billion-dollar technology, centuries of tradition, and pure grit were failing. The solution wouldn't come from a new rifle or a hardened drill instructor. It would arrive in the form of a soft-spoken woman from a small coastal town, armed not with a weapon, but with a deep, unshakable understanding of a force far more unpredictable than any enemy: the human mind. This is the true story of how a mother, a yoga practitioner, and an outsider rewrote the rules of combat accuracy without ever firing a single shot. The frustration at the weapons training battalion in Quantico was a physical thing, a thick, hot haze that hung in the air alongside the smell of cordite and dust. It was the early 2000s, and the United States Marine Corps, the proud, unwavering force that prided itself on producing the world's finest marksmen, had a secret it was desperate to solve. Their top-tier snipers and designated marksmen, men who could run 20 miles with full gear and stare down death without blinking, were inexplicably losing their edge. On the known distance ranges, they performed flawlessly. But in the field, under the shifting light and unpredictable winds of the force reconnaissance and scout sniper courses, their rounds were going wide. They were missing man-sized targets at distances they should have owned. The problem wasn't the equipment. The M40A3 sniper rifles were precision instruments. It wasn't the training. The coaches were battle-hardened veterans. Command was baffled. A silent epidemic of inaccuracy was spreading, and it threatened the very essence of the Marine Corps' identity. Into this world of camo green and coiled tension walked a woman named Lisa. She was neither a soldier nor a scientist. She was a 38-year-old mother of two from Virginia Beach, a former collegiate swimmer who now taught yoga and worked as a counselor. Her frame was slight, her demeanor calm, a stark contrast to the powerful, tattooed men who populated the ranges. She had been invited by a desperate officer who had heard whispers of her work with athletes and special operations units. Her expertise was in performance psychology and something called optic flow, a concept related to visual perception and movement. To the Marines, it sounded like academic nonsense. Their initial reaction was a mixture of skepticism and outright hostility. A yoga teacher was going to teach Marines how to shoot. It was an insult wrapped in a puzzle. Lisa's first day on the range was a trial by fire. She was met with crossed arms, averted eyes, and a wall of silent, granite-like resistance. The commanding officer introduced her without enthusiasm. She asked to simply observe the next training exercise. The students, elite Marines vying for the coveted scout sniper designation, were running a stalk. They had to crawl over 1,000 yards of open ground, using every scrap of cover to get into a firing position without being seen by evaluators. Lisa watched, not the shots, but the men. She saw the tremendous physical cost of the stalk, the gritted teeth, the heaving chests as they finally settled behind their rifles. Their heart rates were through the roof, their muscles trembling with fatigue and adrenaline. Then, through their high-powered scopes, they were asked to perform a task requiring micrometer precision, slowing their breathing, calming their minds, and squeezing a trigger without disturbing the crosshairs. It was, she realized instantly, a physiological impossibility. They were being asked to go from a state of extreme sympathetic arousal, the fight or flight crawl, directly into a state of profound parasympathetic calm, the precise shot, with no transition. The body doesn't work that way. She approached the lead instructor, a gunnery sergeant with a gaze that could drill holes in steel. "They're breathing all wrong," she said simply. The gunny snorted. "Ma'am, with all due respect, they're breathing. They're alive. That's what matters out here." Lisa didn't argue. Instead, she asked for a chance to speak to the students. That evening, in a stuffy classroom smelling of sweat and floor wax, she faced a room of 20 of the most skeptical men imaginable. She began not with theory, but with a question. "How many of you, after a long stalk, feel like your heart is trying to punch its way out of your chest. Every hand went up. And how many of you believe you can shoot your best when that's happening? No hands. It was the first crack in the wall. She explained the autonomic nervous system in plain terms. The gas pedal, sympathetic, and the brakes, parasympathetic. Right now, she said, you're stomping on the gas for the stock, and then you're trying to slam on the brakes for the shot. You're crashing the car every time. I'm here to teach you how to use the clutch. The next day, she took them off the range entirely. They went to a grassy field. There were no rifles. Lisa had them lie on their backs in the sun. She guided them through simple diaphragmatic breathing, something many of these supremely fit men had never actually done. She called it tactical breathing. Breathe in for a count of 4, hold for 4, out for 4. She taught them how to find their own pulse and, through breath alone, lower their heart rate on command. To these action-oriented men, it felt absurd, almost embarrassing. But some, the ones who had felt the sting of missing their target, secretly tried. She introduced basic yoga poses not as flexibility exercises, but as a way to learn conscious control over muscle groups, to differentiate between necessary tension and wasteful tension. She talked about the quiet eye, the concept that a shooter's gaze must stabilize on the target before the shot. Her language was strange, full of terms like interoception and psychophysiological regulation, but she grounded everything in the shot. It was always about the shot. Slowly, very slowly, a few Marines began to shift from seeing her as a pointless distraction to a curious, if unproven, tool. The tool would soon be tested in the most unforgiving way possible. The initial curiosity fostered by Lisa's breathing exercises was fragile, a thin layer of ice over a deep lake of tradition. The real turning point came not from a lecture, but from a failure, one of the students' own. A sergeant named Martinez, a Marine with a reputation for unwavering toughness, was on his final field exercise before qualification. The stalk had been brutal, through a swampy area that left him soaked and shivering. By the time he reached his firing point, his body was a chaos of competing signals: cold, fatigue, adrenaline. Through his scope, the target seemed to waver in the heat haze, or was it his own vision? He ran through the shot sequence he'd used for years. He tried to force his breathing to slow. He fought the tremble in his hands. The crack of the rifle felt wrong. Downrange, the spotter called a clean miss. Martinez had failed. That evening, instead of disappearing into his own frustration, he sought out Lisa, who was reviewing her notes under a pine tree. He was angry, but not at her. I did everything right, he growled, more to himself than to her. Lisa listened, then asked a series of simple, disarming questions. Not about ballistics or wind calls, but about his body. What did he feel in his chest when he first saw the target? Where was the tension in his shoulders? Did he notice his visual focus jumping or resting? Martinez, expecting a technical debrief, was thrown. But he answered. He described the buzzing in his head, the tight band across his chest. Lisa nodded. You were in the storm, she said. You were observing the storm from inside it. You need to build a porch. Her analogy stuck. She began working with him one-on-one, not as a shooter, but as a human nervous system. She had him recall the physical sensations of the failed stalk, but in the safety of the grassy field. Then she guided him to use the tactical breathing not after the event, but as a way to process it. She taught him a body scanning technique to identify and release tension before it hijacked his control. It was mental hygiene. A week later, during a retest, Martinez found himself in a similar situation, exhausted, on the edge of hypothermia after a river crossing. But this time, as he settled behind his rifle, he didn't fight the buzz. He acknowledged it. There's a storm. And then he consciously stepped onto his porch. He used his breath to create a small, controlled space of calm within the chaos. His heart rate, monitored on a simple watch Lisa had him wear, actually dropped as he entered his firing position. The shot was smooth. It was a direct hit. He didn't just pass. He achieved one of the highest scores of the cycle. Martinez's success was a crack in the dam. Suddenly, other students were approaching Lisa, not in the open but in quiet corners. Ma'am, about that porch thing. Or how do you quiet your eyes when everything's moving? Her methods were no longer yoga. They were combat breathing and visual anchoring. She began integrating her work directly into the training flow. Before a stalk, she had the Marines spend 2 minutes in a focused breathing drill, setting a baseline of calm. She introduced short, isometric exercises during the stalk to manage heart rate spikes before they became uncontrollable. She worked with the instructors to redefine the ready state. It wasn't just about being in position with a loaded rifle. It was about achieving a specific, measurable physiological state. The coaches, hard men like the gunny, remained skeptical but couldn't argue with the emerging data. The hit rates on unknown distance, field fire courses began to creep upward. Lisa's biggest battle, however, was with the culture itself. The Marine Corps ethos is built on embracing the suck, on pushing through pain and fatigue by sheer force of will. Her teachings felt to some like coddling. A senior instructor pulled her aside. "You're making them soft. A sniper's mind needs to be a fortress, not a porch." Lisa met his gaze. "A fortress can be besieged and taken," she replied. "A fortress is a place you're trapped in. A porch is a place of observation and choice. You own the porch." She argued that true toughness wasn't the absence of physiological response, but the mastery of it. Willpower was a finite fuel. Her techniques were a renewable system. The debate raged in the officers' club and in the squad bays. But on the range, the evidence was building. The students who fully engaged with her work weren't just shooting better. They were recovering faster between shots, making better observational reports, and exhibiting less overall stress. Lisa was no longer just a visiting consultant. She was becoming a quiet, persistent force, slowly reprogramming the instincts of America's most precise warriors from the inside out. With a growing cohort of successful students acting as living proof, Lisa's program began to evolve from a collection of techniques into a formalized system. She called it the performance triad: mind, body, and breath, each acting as a leg of a stable shooting platform. The classroom sessions deepened. She used biofeedback devices, not as gimmicks, but as mirrors. Marines could see, in real time, how a stressful thought, visualizing a past failure, worrying about an evaluator's gaze, would spike their heart rate variability, HRV. Then they could witness how a specific breathing pattern could smooth it back out. This was a revelation. These were men who trusted concrete data above all else. Seeing the invisible storm of their own physiology represented as a wavy line on a screen made it real, manageable, and defeatable. Lisa also tackled the shooter's most intimate relationship, the one with their own rifle. She observed that many Marines saw their weapon as an extension of their will, an object to be dominated and controlled. This led to a death grip, excessive muscle tension, and a fighting relationship with the recoil. She introduced concepts of soft focus and cooperative control. Using unloaded rifles, she had them practice settling into their firing positions with minimal muscle engagement, letting the bipod and sandbags do the work. She borrowed from martial arts, teaching them to accept the recoil, to flow with it rather than resist it. This was perhaps the hardest sell. Letting go of control felt antithetical to everything they knew. But when they tried it, the results were undeniable. Their sight pictures recovered faster after the shot, allowing for quicker follow-up observations. The true crucible, however, was the introduction of extreme stress inoculation. The instructors, now partially converted, worked with Lisa to design scenarios that were less about marksmanship and more about psychological resilience. Students would be woken from a dead sleep and given a complex math problem to solve before being rushed to a firing line. They would have to hold a difficult physical pose until trembling with fatigue, then immediately execute a shot. During live-fire exercises, instructors would stand behind them and yell contradictory instructions, simulating the chaos of combat. Lisa's role was to give them the tools to navigate this deliberately created chaos. Before each event, they would set their baseline with breath. During the stress, they were taught to find a single, neutral sensory anchor, the feel of the stock against their cheek, the sound of their own exhale to prevent cognitive overwhelm. After the event, they practiced a quick reset routine to shed the stress before it accumulated. One student, a young corporal named Evans, exemplified this transformation. He was a brilliant natural shooter who fell apart under pressure, a common and career-ending flaw. During a high-stress shoot, with blank rounds cracking near his position and an instructor screaming in his ear, Evans froze. His eyes went wide, his breathing shallow. He missed 3 easy shots. Afterwards, dejected, he told Lisa he was done. He didn't have the right mind for it. Lisa disagreed. "You have the perfect mind for it," she said. "It's just overprotective. It's trying to save you from a threat that isn't there." She worked with him to reframe the physiological signals of stress. The racing heart wasn't fear, it was preparation. The heightened awareness was a gift, not a curse. She taught him to label the sensations. There's the adrenaline, there's the tunnel vision, which created cognitive distance from them. On his next eval, the same chaos was manufactured. This time, when the storm hit, Evans didn't fight it or freeze. He acknowledged it, used a sharp exhale to discharge the initial spike, anchored himself with the feel of the rifle's safety under his thumb, and proceeded. He hit all his targets. He hadn't conquered his stress. He had learned to dance with it. His success marked a paradigm shift. The goal was no longer to create fearless robots, but to forge adaptable, aware warriors who could perform precision tasks in the heart of the storm. Lisa's porch was becoming an unshakable observation post in the middle of a hurricane. The proof, as they say, was in the pudding, and in the Marine Corps, the pudding was hard data from combat deployments. As the first waves of snipers trained under Lisa's integrated program began to rotate into theaters like Iraq and Afghanistan, after-action reports started to tell a new story. The anecdotes filtering back to Quantico were not just about accuracy, but about a profound change in operational effectiveness and survivability. A scout sniper team, embedded with a battalion in the steep valleys of Khyber province, reported being compromised by an unexpected shepherd. Forced to execute a rapid displacement under potential enemy observation, their heart rate spiked. Instead of scrambling in a panic, the spotter, recalling his training, initiated a deliberate 2-cycle breathing pattern as they moved. By the time they established a new hide site a kilometer away, both Marines had regulated their physiology. Calm, their visual perception sharp, they were able to quickly reacquire their target area and provide critical intelligence that prevented an ambush on a friendly patrol. The report highlighted not the shot they took, but the shot they didn't have to take because of their enhanced situational awareness and control. Another report came from a force reconnaissance marksman in the dense urban clutter of Fallujah. His team was taking effective fire from a distant window, pinning down a squad of Marines. The shot was at the extreme edge of his rifle's effective range, with a complex wind call over heat-baked rubble. The pressure was immense. Lives hung on his next breath. In his debrief, he wrote, "I found my porch. I felt the wind on my neck, not as a problem, but as information. The buzzing in my ears became just a sound. My spotter gave the correction, and the space between his words and my squeeze felt quiet. It was a good hit. The language itself had changed. The reports were less about mechanical actions and more about conscious process. Commanding officers, initially wary of the mindfulness approach, were now seeing tangible results. Longer successful engagement ranges, higher first-round hit probabilities, and, most importantly, teams that could operate effectively under sustained pressure for longer periods. Back at the training battalion, this combat validation was the final key that unlocked institutional acceptance. Lisa's methods, once a fringe experiment, were being written into the official Scout Sniper Instructor Guide and the Marine Corps Martial Arts Program, which encompasses mental discipline. The gruff gunnery sergeant who had been her first critic became one of her staunchest advocates. He was seen on the range, reminding a struggling student to check your porch or stop fighting your breath. The culture was adapting. The nightly skate, mandatory relaxation time, was no longer seen as a luxury, but as a necessary part of performance maintenance. Students practiced their breathing drills with the same seriousness they applied to cleaning their weapons. Lisa herself had evolved. She was no longer the outsider yoga teacher. She was Ms. Lisa, a respected and integral part of the training pipeline. She learned to speak their language fluently, weaving metaphors of weapon systems and combat scenarios into her explanations of neuroscience. She pushed the envelope further, incorporating controlled exposure to cold and hunger to teach regulation under resource depletion. Her work began to attract attention from other branches. The Army Rangers and Navy SEALs sent observers. But her heart remained with the Marines, the first institution to take a chance on her. She saw the impact beyond the range. Marines confided in her about using the tactical breathing to manage crippling anxiety before a patrol or the body scan techniques to fall asleep after a traumatic event. She had given them tools not just for the shot, but for the war within, tools that would serve them long after they left the service. The woman who changed how the Marines hit targets was, in a very real sense, helping them rebuild their relationship with themselves. The legacy of Lisa's work transcended the sniper ranges and even the Marine Corps. It became a case study in the broader revolution of human performance optimization within the military and high-stakes professions. The principles she championed, the integration of physiological regulation with cognitive performance, are now foundational in special operations training worldwide. But the most profound impact was on the individual Marines, the human weapons who learned they were first and foremost human. Years after her initial intervention, Lisa received a letter. It was from Sergeant Martinez, the first Marine who had openly come to her after his failure. He was out of the Corps now, working as a police officer in a major city. He wrote not about shooting, but about a crisis call he had responded to. A man was on a ledge, high above the street, threatening to jump. The scene was chaos, screaming crowds, swirling lights, the frantic negotiations of other officers. Martinez was tasked with providing overwatch from adjacent building, a terrible responsibility. As he settled into position, the old ghosts rose, the pounding heart, the tunnel vision, the fear of a catastrophic miss. Then, he wrote, "I heard your voice in my head. Not the words, but the calm. I found my pulse. I breathed for 4. The world didn't slow down, but I found a still point inside it. I didn't take the shot that day. Negotiation worked. But for the first time in my life, in the middle of all that hell, I knew I was truly in control of my instrument. You gave me that. It's the most important tool on my belt." Stories like Martinez's became the true measure of success. Another former student, now a firefighter, used the techniques to maintain clarity while crawling through a smoke-filled hallway. A surgeon who had been a Force Recon Marine wrote to say she used the quiet eye drill to steady her hands and focus during complex procedures. The training had given them a portable sanctuary, a physiological and mental toolkit they could access in any storm life threw at them. Lisa eventually stepped back from her daily role at Quantico, though she remained a consultant. The system she helped build is now self-sustaining, taught by a cadre of instructors who are themselves living proof of its power. The course for Scout Snipers is still one of the most physically and mentally demanding in the world, but its philosophy has been forever altered. It is no longer just about forging a weapon, but about cultivating a mindful warrior, one who understands that the ultimate target is not downrange, but the inner noise that can obscure it. The final image is not of a perfect shot on a distant range, but of a simple, enduring change. It's in the young private first class, lying on his cot before a pre-dawn patrol, consciously breathing away the knot of dread in his stomach. It's in the instructor who, instead of yelling at a shaking student, puts a hand on his shoulder and says, "Just breathe through it. Find your anchor." The problem that once plagued the Marines, the elusive target, was never really about the target at all. It It was about the instrument aiming at it. By teaching them to understand and master the chaotic, beautiful, and deeply human system behind the rifle, one woman didn't just improve their hit rate. She changed the definition of what it means to be a marksman, and in doing so, gave thousands of men and women a profound gift: the unshakable knowledge that no matter how fierce the storm, they could always find their porch.